essentially want to create this huge bubble where there isn't much coming in and nobody really going out.
Hmm. Well, I mean, based on how they're, my biggest concern, actually, to be honest with you, won't be the virus itself. I think they'll take a lot of measures to protect the athletes as it pertains to the virus itself, and my biggest concern is just returning to play after having 2-3 months off.
Right.
The NFL, they had a strike and they came back. There was a huge spike in major injuries like ACL tears and even minor injuries that kept athletes out. And that was a strike that didn't leave them unable to train. That just left them unable to play their sport. So we're now dealing with athletes who, I mean, except if you're LeBron and you've had, or a group of athletes and have had sort of group trainings together,
Yep.
you're dealing with athletes who haven't been participating in the sport at the intensity that they're used to participating in. And so my biggest concern is these athletes coming back, and regardless of what amount of training camp, I think it's 2 or 3 weeks that they may be considering. It just may not. And then ramping up to a regular season that means something, like for qualifying into the playoffs and then to the playoffs itself. I would be more concerned for risk of injuries and major injuries that could occur. I trust with all these sports leagues. Like I'm obviously working with certain athletic organizations. A lot of these sports organizations have really close contact with high up medical individuals, and I imagine whatever strategies they take to allow these athletes to participate, they've done them. They've sort of taken the time to recognize what needs to be done for the safety of the athletes as it pertains to this virus. So I have trust and faith in that. I'm not as concerned about it, especially with some of the, like you said, this bubble that they're creating.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be good. Will some people potentially get infected with the virus? Yeah, I think there could be a risk of that, and it's really hard to try to mitigate that or minimize that. But
Mm-hmm.
but from all accounts and from my understanding, I think these leagues have really close contact with really high up medical people to ensure that the best case scenario is created. And I mean, a virus is not going to go anyway. It's not going to go away. So if it's here now, it's going to be here forever.
Our younger athletes, this younger generation, continues to get injured a lot more than what we're accustomed to. And there are things on the internet, right? Again, we go into this Google hole and you read stuff like, well, the single biggest factor contributing to the dramatic increase in overuse injuries is young athletes that focus on more intense, repetitive, and specialized training at much younger ages. But again, we also live in a society where you want to be specialized in
Mm.
anything that you do. So how do you go away from that idea of like, well, if you want to be a journalist or if you want to be a sports journalist, you should do a lot of rating of sports, doing trying to do all this stuff that can help you in your personal craft. So how do you go away from it knowing that it could potentially damage you when you apply it to a medical sense and when you apply it to an athlete? Because these kids are growing up playing AU basketball, playing so many tournaments, you putting all the stress on your feet, and maybe they're not playing as many different sports as they used to.
Yeah, you raised a good point, and early specialization is like there was a period of time where specialization was what you needed to do
Right.
to get into professional sports and to exceed in professional sports. And now we're transitioning into, okay, well, maybe we need to be more generalists. We need to do less specialization because of the repetitive nature of and loading on the tissues. And the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. As often it's the case, it's you do need to spend time specializing and becoming proficient in the activity that you're doing. But you need to round that and balance that out. There's definitely an effect. Like one of the effects is as you specialize, as you strive for greatness at a very young age, and you start to specialize and train for it, what naturally then happens is you'll probably think, okay, I need to prepare my body better for this. So then you start to
Right.
train at a very young age, and all these things are loads on the body, and the body can tolerate a lot of load, but if you start to load the body above its threshold, it'll break down. And we're not machines in that. And the loading that we take is not just simply mechanical. And what I mean by that is that, take for example, most adolescent kids in North America average around 7 hours, sometimes less than 7 hours sleep. And there's tons of studies now that show if you're an adolescent athlete or pre-adolescent and you're getting less than 8 hours of sleep, you're 2 times more at risk of injury.
Wow.
And that's significant when you think about it. And and that's huge. And so you may be doing all the right things, like you're specializing. So then you're training to maintain your body for that specialization. But then if your diet's not great, your sleep is not great, these are all things that reduces your body's ability to handle load. If we're machines, it doesn't matter how much sleep we get. But our body is not like that. We're not machines. All these other sort of variables impact it. So early specialization is definitely something that is contributing to it.
So you're saying they need 8 hours of sleep?
Yes. Well, adolescent athletes actually require 9 to 10 hours of sleep.
What?
I know, it's crazy. Physiologically, that's how much time your body needs when you're maturing skeletally, and you don't really finish maturing 100% until early to mid 20s. So obviously, it's if we took the measures to actually take care of the body the way we need to take care of the body, so many different industries will probably not make as much money. But these are and there's tons of literature to show this. These are critical things that and it's getting worse. Like the amount of sleep people are getting is only getting worse. And so that's just a small variable. And even our diet and the food sources that we're getting is not even the same as it was 30 years ago. The farm food that we got in grocery stores is not the same food we get in grocery stores now, and that has an effect on our cells. That has an effect on our ability to recover. So these are variables that we don't always pay attention to, but it impacts our bodies to handle loads. And so if we're continually increasing the loads in our body through specialization, it's going to have a negative effect. And then if we're increasing our training to try to be more proficient at our specialized sport, we're adding even more load to the body. So it's a very fine line, and I'm not one to say don't specialize. You need to be just a generalist, but I'll also not tell an athlete just specialize. I think you need to recognize, and this is if you're working with a really good medical staff, whether it's a strength coach, whether it's someone like me, they'll be able to look and see, okay, here's what your body needs to be proficient in your sport. How can we condition it so that it can be proficient in your sport, utilizing some other things that are not your sport related?
Looking at athletes like say a Zion Williamson, if he were his medical professional or his strength coach, what type of advice would you give him? Because I don't think we've ever seen an athlete of his capacity weigh that much, but yet have that bounce. Like, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, look, think of it this way: when you land, you're absorbing. Your tissues are having to absorb up to 9 times, anywhere from 6 to 10 times your body weight. So take Zion's body weight, multiply that by 10. His tissues are having to absorb that weight. And a lot of times we think injuries happen in the act of propelling ourselves forward. So let's say running. But failure begins in our inability to absorb forces. So every single time I step on the ground, I'm absorbing forces. I'm absorbing reaction forces off the ground. My body is having to absorb that, collect that as potential energy, and then it releases that as kinetic energy or movement. So for someone like him, he has obviously great genetic ability and great tissue resilience and everything and strength. But given his weight and given the nature of his sport, I know load management sometimes gets a really bad knock on it, and I'm not saying he should load manage, but I would really monitor how he's loading his body to make sure he's loading it appropriately, so that he's improving his body's ability to absorb reaction forces, because that's when failure will happen for him. Failure will happen for most athletes when they land and they're attempting to recoil and jump back up.
So that's a perfect way to transition into our last topic, which is ankle injuries, maybe a little bit of knee injuries for my audience who has suffered of knee injuries. But specifically to my injury that I suffered last June 25th of 2019. I went up for a block and I came down and I just completely rolled it. So the person kind of like shoved me a little bit. I went backwards. Offensive players like to use the off arm now, but I'm competitive, so I still want to go for the block. But I feel like my body maybe gave out on me when I came down. Maybe like you
Yeah.
said, maybe I didn't practice or I didn't strengthen those tissues for situations like that.
Yeah.
And maybe I was playing six days a week. I was overloading my body, and it just gave out on
Yeah.
me. I don't know. Like, we don't know.
Yeah.
But what I know is that I was on the floor and everybody stopped, and it was extreme. Like, I knew right away what it was, and I knew it was something severe, and it's not something that you want to relive or rethink about, because I always cringe like when I think about it in my head, and I have that in my head a lot. Like when I'm playing now, it's in my head, and I'm sure
Yeah.
a lot of the great athletes or the professional athletes that come back from injuries, it takes them a while to really regain form because it's all here. But so that happened, and which then is going to lead to my second part of the question, which is De'Aaron Fox. He got diagnosed with high ankle sprain level 3, and so did I. Or at first he said it was a level 4, but when I looked on Google, I felt like there was only 3. But
Yeah.
my thing is, it took me a month just to put on a shoe because the swelling wouldn't go down. My thing is, how on earth did De'Aaron Fox, which is a great thing because I love him and he's a franchise player, he came back in a month, was conditioned, and
Yeah.
he was ready to, like, he never had it, which was
Yeah.
insane. Lonzo Ball, same injury, took him about 4 months. So
Yeah.
what do you think happened? Was maybe his injury not a level 3 and maybe a level 2? Is there a big difference in that, or?
Well, it can't. Sometimes someone may have diagnosed it at a level that it wasn't. That could happen. But you know what? There's differences amongst people. Adrian Peterson came back from an ACL tear in the NFL after 6 months, which
It's
is
fucking insane.
ridiculously unheard of. Most surgeons will say, I'm not going to let you go back until 9 months because 9 months is this sort of Goldilocks period where success rate is so much higher. But he came back in 6 months, and not every athlete could have done that. And I don't know necessarily if Adrian Peterson was doing something that was unique or special than other athletes, except Adrian Peterson. So there is sort of a quality to an individual. Like there's individuals who are born with certain genes that make them more at risk for tendon-related injuries. And that's a known thing now. We didn't know this before, but we know it now. So some of that is just the individual, it's genetics, it's maybe the individual's strength and capacity leading up to the injury. Sometimes it's the severity. Like maybe, we have these designations like level 1, level 2, level 3,
Uh-huh.
but there's variability to how damage happens. Like let's say in your case, you may have had a really severe high ankle sprain and maybe tore that ligament slightly, but you may have also torn this sort of membrane that's in between your tibia and your fibula, the two bones in your lower leg. You may have torn some other connective tissue, like your fascial tissue or things like that. So these damages, we try to classify them mostly for us to appreciate what's been damaged and the prognosis and a way to communicate. But there's variability in everyone's body, and although you both had a high ankle sprain, the other aspects of your tissues that were damaged may have been slightly different.